Thank. Yes, we are on. Oh, well, isn't that lovely? Let me get rid of this for a moment, and we can get up and running here. All this high technology stuff really blows me away. I'm one of the few of my colleagues that even know how to do this, would you believe? Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Are you all having a wonderful cruise? How many of you are on your first ever cruise? Any of you here today? Oh, very few. Good, wonderful. Experience, probably more experienced than me. This is my 21st opportunity to cruise. Most of my cruising, however, was done back in the 80s. And would you believe it's been nearly 20 years since I've had the privilege of standing in front of a cruise audience. As Stuart mentioned earlier, the pixelation here is just a little bit short of what I'd hoped, and consequently some of the graphics will be a little bit difficult to read. And I would encourage any of you who are up the back to move down as close as you can, because I assure you you'll enjoy it much better down here, apart from which I pick on the people at the back throughout the presentation. Just to get underway, I thought it might be appropriate to give you a little bit of my background and tell you where I've been and what I've done over the years. I've been traveling the world for over 25 years now, studying and investigating the strange and the unusual, things that go bump in the night. Have you bumped in the night lately, madam? You have. This is the perfect location for. But I've been thrilled and amazed throughout those years at the various archaeological and historical and geographical and astrophysical things that we see around the world today, some of the world's greatest mysteries. My television series, which ran in Australia for some 22 years, was called Peter J. Shield's World of Unexplained Mysteries, and featured those locations and those various mysteries from around the world. In the very short time that we have in a cruise situation like this, it won't be possible to bring you a fraction of the incredible things that I've been able to explore over the years. But I've picked a couple of my favorite topics to share with you. Today I'm going to start with the island of Malta. Malta plays a very big part in my heart. It's where I developed my love of archaeology many, many years ago, in the early 50s. I was Associated Press's correspondent in the Middle East after I finished my service with the British Air Force, and traveled back to Malta and joined their Central Office of Information. I was primarily a photographer at the time that I joined Cambridge University's archaeological team, and was challenged with the task of photographing and recording all the archaeological items and sites and locations on this incredible little island in the midst of the Mediterranean. How many of you have been to Malta? Anybody here? Oh, how wonderful. Oh, excellent. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. So I'm already talking to the converted. I was privileged back in those days to work on the site on the little island of Gozo, which we'll talk a little bit about today, a site called Gigantia, and more primarily with the catacombs on the island, those at St. Agatha's and St. Paul's. And again, we'll look at those in some depth in the course of the next few moments. This year was the launch of my first ever attempt at historic fiction, a book which I titled In the Image of His God. For 20-odd years, I was involved with the Shroud of Turin research group in the investigative work done into this amazing cloth, primarily, of course, to identify the image and how it got there, and more recently, the authenticity and the dating of the cloth, which, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, came under a certain amount of controversy after the carbon dating in 1988. Well, I've got some exciting news for you if you haven't kept up to date, and you can forget the carbon dating of 1988. My book was launched at our International Convention for the Shroud at Ohio State University in October. It's called In the Image of His God, and it's a fictitious story based in Malta, on the Shroud and the archaeological sites on the island itself. I'm told that it will be available in the gift shop as of tomorrow, and I have only 40 copies with me on the cruise, so if any of you would like it, I'd be delighted to autograph it for you. The Shroud will be the subject of my lecture tomorrow. So I won't say much more about it other than to remind you that that lecture is on, I believe, at this same time, and it'll be my pleasure to welcome you here, and we'll talk in depth about the evidence for and against the Shroud of Turin as being the original cloth in which Jesus Christ was wrapped at the time of his crucifixion. Along with the book is a CD which encompasses all the interviews that I did back in the 80s with the members of the STURP group, the Shroud of Turin Research Project group, that went to Turin in 1988, or 1978, I beg your pardon, and carried out the investigation, not as to the authenticity of the shroud, would you believe, but more importantly, as to how and when the image that we see on the cloth actually got there. And that's what we're going to be discussing tomorrow. So those recordings are available along with the book, and as I say, hopefully in the bookstore by tomorrow. All right, let's talk a little bit about Malta. Can you folks hear me okay at the back? The reason I ask is I was doing a presentation like this in my hometown of Las Vegas a few weeks ago, and there was a lady right at the back where you are, madam, got to her feet, and she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've been at the back for the last 20 minutes, and I haven't heard a word you said." And there was a gentleman right down the front where you are, sir, got to his feet. He said, "Listen, I've been down the front for 20 minutes. I've heard every word you've said, and I'll gladly change places with the lady at the back." So I must share with you a very funny story. We just recently had a highly terrific snowstorm in Las Vegas. Anybody here from Vegas, by the way? Any fellow Vegans here? No? Well, we were covered in snow, which is very unusual, as I'm sure you're aware, for our little city. And I was driving on my way down the strip, and I put on my brakes at a traffic light, and unfortunately my car decided it didn't want to stop and just bumped gently into the back of the truck in front of me. And I was quite amazed because a little dwarf got out and walked around, and he looked at the dent in the back of his truck, and he said, "I'm not happy." And I said, "Okay, who are you?" Terrible. Oh, absolutely terrible. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you saw The Count of Monte Cristo, a fabulous movie. Alexander Dumas's incredible story written in 1844. It's the story of a gentleman who's placed in captivity and eventually escapes from the Chateau d'If prison and manages to get to this tiny little island of Monte Cristo, which, in case you're not conversant, is between Corsica and Italy, about halfway between. However, they didn't choose the island of Monte Carlo, I beg your pardon, from Monte Cristo for the film. It was actually filmed on the little island of Camino. The Maltese Islands, and let me see if I can get I was anticipating having a neck mic, but it's going to be a bit difficult trying to operate a laser pointer and a microphone and everything else at the same time, but we'll try and do it. We'll get by, I'm sure. Camino, the islands of Malta are three islands. The island of Gozo, the island of Malta itself, and rather interestingly, the capital of Valletta, which is right here in the Grand Harbor, this ship is registered there. If you look at your lifeboats as you walk out on deck, you'll see Valletta on the side. It's located some 60 miles off the coast of Sicily. It's a small little island tucked right in the heart of the Mediterranean, and just here south of Sicily, as you'll see. There are three small islands, the sister island of Gozo, the island of Camino, which is virtually uninhabited, and of course the island of Malta itself. Did any of you see the Monte Cristo film, the more recent one? Yes, an outstanding movie. If you haven't seen it, or if it's available on DVD, I recommend that you get it. The island of Malta has witnessed traces of man for over 7,000 years. Interestingly enough, thousands of years before Stonehenge, dozens of mysterious megalithic temples were built all over the island, huge stone complexes that make up all the temples of the island, and there are just too many to mention to you. What's so tragic is, unfortunately, the Maltese government don't have the funds at their disposal to enable them to preserve and to maintain these sites, which is a crime to humanity, in my humble opinion. Temples of Gigantia and Hypogeum, we'll talk about today, Madeira, Tashin, and most importantly, the Hypogeum at Hal Safini. Just absolutely will blow your minds if you have an opportunity to go there. One little tip about the Hypogeum. If you go to Malta, you can go and visit any of the archaeological sites, either on your own or escorted by a government guide. There are all sorts of tours available to you. But the island of, I beg your pardon, the site of the Hypogeum at Safalini is incredibly in high demand, and it's extremely tightly controlled in terms of the number of people who are permitted to visit it at any one time. If you're visiting on a cruise, you need to make pre-arrangements before you get there, because most of your cruise lines only spend one day in Malta. It's well worth spending the week there, and this is unquestionably one of the most unique and important sites that you're ever likely to see in your lifetime. It's pictured here on the left. Photography is not permitted, but thanks to the advent of digital photography, if you've attended any of the digital classes on board, you'll understand. The sensitivity of digital photography today allows you to take photographs in extreme lighting conditions, which were not generally available to us back in my early days. So I was able to sneak in with a digital camera and with my flash turned off and take my cheeky little photograph, which is just here. The image in the middle, and again, I apologize for the definition. They're probably a little better up on the side screens. This is the sleeping goddess. This tiny little statue, let me give you an idea of its size, because I've actually got a replica piece here. And what I'm going to do at the end of the lecture, I have a couple of little items. I'm going to place them just here. And if any of you would like to come down and have a look, please feel free to do so. I would appreciate if you didn't touch them, particularly the second piece that I'm going to introduce you to in a couple of moments. The picture on the right is, you might recognize the very handsome gentleman just there. That's me. Facing Father Victor Camilleri, who is one of the most remarkable gentlemen I've ever had the privilege of working with in my life. He today is the curator of the museum at St. Agatha's Catacombs, and this photograph was taken in 1956 as we broke into the entrance of the catacombs and started the excavation, which has gone on and in fact is still going on to this day. Malta's fate has been closely linked with the Knights. Those of you who have been to Malta will no doubt have been incredibly impressed with the fortifications and the temples and the palaces that abound on the island and have been left by the Knights. Like Sicily, she was invaded by the Knights, and they held rule for a considerable number of years. In 1530, the King of Spain gave Malta the Knights Hospitallers with permanent sovereignty over the island. 35 years later, the Knights withstood the onslaught of over 30,000 Turkish amphibious troops with less than 10,000 men. And that battle is well recorded and is well worth reading about. You'll find full documentation of it, by the way, in my book on the Shroud. For over a century, the order ruled the island. However, the Turks had been unable to achieve their demise over 4 months of battle. The French, however, sailed in under Napoleon and requested an opportunity to resupply their ships with water. And in the course, not only took over the island, but within a matter of weeks, the Knights were gone. One of the questions that abound for people in my field, and certainly the treasure hunters of this world, is what happened to the massive hoards of wealth that were amassed by the Knights during their stay on the island. They spent their time plundering pirate ships in the Mediterranean. And of course, I believe that's probably where Alexander Dumas got the idea of housing the treasure which young Edmund found when he visited Monte Cristo. we still believe that somewhere on that island is concealed a massive wealth, a massive archaeological and historical treasures captured from those Spanish galleons that sailed the Mediterranean in those days. It is, in fact, the subject of my next book, which you can expect to read in about 5 years' time at my present rate. These are just some quick pictures. I don't know, we've got an awful lot of light on up here. Is there a technician within earshot that can kill some of those spotlights so we can see this main screen a little better? I'm sure they don't want to look at me, but the picture on the left shows the harbor. Malta was, of course, famous for its dockyards, and at the time that I first went there in the early 50s, a great deal of controversy was going on between the British and the Maltese government for possession of these dockyards. In the center is oh, thank you so much. That's much better. In the center is a picture of yours truly with my little vineyard at the back of my home in Malta. Down here, this is the Phoenician Hotel and the main central bus terminal, which is right outside the main gates to the city of Valletta. The buses still operate today. They've operated, well, they were there in the 50s when I was there, and they're very, very popular and very much a part of the Maltese culture and history. And if you've sailed in a cruise ship, you would have come in through this entranceway just here into the amazing Grand Harbor. That is just one of the most incredible places that you would ever have an opportunity to visit. The picture you see on the top left, I'm very proud of. This is an aircraft carrier from the U.S. Navy that was visiting Malta. And just in case you didn't recognize him, this is a pigeon. So I titled the photograph, Carrier Pigeon. Yes, I know. The bottom right-hand picture, can anybody identify that? Anybody know what we're looking at? Popeye Village. If any of you saw that incredibly bad movie that Robin Williams made in 1985, and it would have to be, I guess, the bane of his life, it was one of the most atrocious movies I think I've ever had the opportunity to view. It was filmed right here. What they did leave was this incredible set, all in one piece. In fact, my son, who is, I'm proud to say, one of the world's foremost glass blowers, operated his studio right here in this area, which was the old baker's shop in the movie. But the set was built not with just facades like one normally experiences when you walk onto a movie set, but in this instance was built with fully fledged buildings as you see them there today. And so you can visit Popeye Village and explore all the exciting things, meet Popeye himself and get a kiss if you're lucky from Olive. Originally located on a land bridge between Europe and Africa, setting as Malta does in the center of the Mediterranean, it's been colonized and invaded repeatedly since man first discovered the art of boat building. Until it became independent in 1964, Malta's been occupied at different times by the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Normans, the Germans, the Spaniards, the crusading knights, and the French, and of course eventually the British, whose indelible instinct and mark remains on Malta to this very day. But no other country in the world has had the influx of civilizations that have left their indelible marks on the island to the extent that my beloved Malta has. The original occupants, who disappeared some 2,000 years BC, were drawn by the beautiful fertile land that existed on the island at that time. There's not a lot of fertile land there, I might tell you now. The first settlers came from Sicily with their traditional farming methods and their stone crafts, notably in obsidian and flint. More than just a tranquil haven, the Maltese Islands must have seemed to them a place of magic, dedicated to the time immoral of their deity, the mother goddess of fertility. In 4000 BC, new settlers made themselves her architects. And in the process built and carved these incredible megaliths, temples, and mysteriously disappeared after 2,000 years. This will give you a timeline, and I apologize for again for the for the graphic, it does make it very difficult to read the dates and times. This is that incredible Hypogeum that I mentioned to you, and as I say, I can't emphasize strongly enough the need to pre-arrange your tour of the Hypogeum if you do intend to visit Malta, and it will be one of the highlights of your visit, I assure you. You need, on average, 2 weeks' notice to be able to enter the Hypogeum. Anybody here had the opportunity to visit the Hypogeum, by the way? I saw a lot of hands from Malta, a couple down here. Impressive? Unbelievable, quite. Discovered in 1902, rather interestingly enough, a little bit like the terracotta warriors. Unlike farmers that were digging, these were construction workers in 1902, working in the little town of Paola, just outside the capital of Valletta. And they discovered as they were erecting and digging and plowing and doing what they do, a giant hole. And they thought it was just one of the natural caverns that exists in the sandstone base of Malta as an island. And they used it for depositing all their refuge. Well, at some stage during that construction, somebody took the trouble to go down and take a closer look. And the Hypogeum, of course, is what they discovered. Today, it's listed on UNESCO's list of World Heritage Site. It's not the oldest site on the island. This one is dated somewhere between 3300 and 3000 BC. It was undoubtedly a very significant temple and more than likely a cemetery chapel at that time. Ardalam is by far the oldest of the locations on the island, going back over 125,000 years, if you can imagine that. I filmed the last of my television series there in the cave at Ardalam. This is a photograph of myself with John J. Borg, who is the resident curator at the site and the archaeologist responsible for some of the more recent finds within the cave. But Ardalam is most exciting. There are very few archaeological sites that you can visit in the world, ladies and gentlemen, where you're actually allowed within touching distance of artifacts and bone breccia, as we call it. Malta is quite different in that regard. I was able to walk through the grounds here, through the catacomb. The general public, of course, had kept on here. But even as I entered in through here, I was able to reach down and pick up the remains, a piece of bone from a hippopotamus. And by the way, Malta was occupied by, would you believe, dwarf elephants and dwarf hippopotami in its early days. And the piece of bone that I picked up was identified by my colleague as being 10,000 years old. Now, I wonder what that would fetch on eBay. And just in case you've never seen a piece of 10,000-year-old hippopotamus, they're probably everywhere, I'll put it down here, and you can take a quick look at it as we conclude. Please don't steal it. It's my pride and joy. The image that you see is a fossilized hippopotamus, would you believe? Not to be found, funnily enough, at Ardalam, but actually is on the island of Gozo. Hypogeum sits on the southern tip of the island of Malta, overlooking a little island called Filfla. Filfla was used as a bombing and gunnery target by the British Air Force during the Second World War, much to the annoyance and, I believe, justified anger of the local population. Today it's a bird sanctuary, and it's a beautiful little island that sits just off the coast. It's nothing more than a big inhabited rock, but it's very beautiful. Hypogeum looks out over that particular area. The date, of course, 3000 to 2500 BC. This collection of photographs, and again, I apologize for the definition, are what I consider some of the most beautiful works on the island. I was invited, as I think I mentioned at the outset, to be part of the investigative team that went in and excavated here at St. Agatha's. This photograph is a 190-degree panorama of the crypt. I'll show you a map of the catacombs in a moment, but when you come in through this doorway, you're actually facing this altar. It's a bit misleading because of the dimensions of the photograph. One of the entrances to the catacombs themselves is just here, and there's another one just behind these pots here. It was in this area that we did our early excavation, and more recently in this field over here. This area today is open to the public. This is still not. It is still closed. These two bodies, skeletons, skeletal remains that you can see up here, are in a typical canopy grave that's found within the catacombs on Malta. These are Christian and pre-Christian catacombs. This is what they call an agape table. The agape table was a table where they had their funeral repast, and the open coffin or sarcophagus behind them here. These images on the wall here, this is a close-up image of this area here, is believed to be the very first church on the island of Malta. And the way that it's been carved, and the intricate carvings and the frescoes themselves, which are the original frescoes, still there to this day for you to see, are quite remarkable. This is the typical tomb or canopy grave, as they're known, at St. Agatha's. But again, I would put that as number one on your visitors list if you ever intend to visit that unique island. It really is a highly remarkable place. This is the incredible maze of the catacombs that lie under the city of Rabat and the ancient capital of Medina. We entered first of all through here. That early photograph you saw was of the entrance here, which we've since put steps in, and it goes down into that area here, which was that crypt to St. Agatha. St. Agatha is the patron saint, of course, of the Missionary Society of St. Peter and St. Paul, who look after and care for the catacombs. And Father Victor Camilleri, whom I mentioned, has now amassed what must be one of the most amazing archaeological collections and museums housed here at St. Agatha's. As you go down into here, we come back into this incredibly intense area of graves and tombs throughout here. The little original church that you saw is just here. In the book, In the Image of His God, without wanting to reveal the plot to you too greatly, much of the activity takes place in this area here. This area over here is underneath St. Paul's Cathedral in Rabat, and beneath it are catacombs which were said to have been occupied for 3 months by St. Paul after his shipwreck on the island in AD 60. These areas, these catacombs here, are not open to the public. We have excavated probably 70 to 80% of them, but it is only this area that the general public is allowed through. Interestingly enough, there are two incredible sets of catacombs in Rabat. One of them is called the Catacombs of St. Peter and St. Paul, and it's across the road. It would be, I guess, geographically, let me think, round about here in Rabat, and it is looked after by the Maltese government. When you go there to visit those catacombs, you are given a headset with an audio recording of the history of the catacombs, and you are allowed to wander willy-nilly through the catacombs and do what you will. Well, needless to say, with the vandals that unfortunately exist in our society today, those catacombs have, for all intents and purposes, been destroyed. Graffiti everywhere. It's quite, it's heartbreaking for anybody who has any real love of history and archaeology. However, the catacombs at St. Agatha's, quite the opposite. The Missionary Society of St. Peter and St. Paul, under the guidance of Father Victor, have maintained these catacombs. You can only enter the catacombs accompanied by a guide, and that guide will not only explain in detail the catacombs themselves, but more importantly preserve this historic venue. More importantly most important are the incredible frescoes that exist within the catacomb, dating back in some cases to 600 AD. These are actual wall paintings that are still there in their original form. Frescoes of a quality and nature that you won't see anywhere else in the world, ladies and gentlemen. This is St. Agatha herself, and this, of course, is a close-up of the altar in the what is believed to be the oldest chapel in the world, or the oldest church in the world. Quite remarkable in their entirety. This is beloved Father Victor. This is him in 1957, along with yours truly. And this is the two of us taken a few years ago. I know it's difficult for you to tell the difference between the two, but we do tend to age, don't we? The picture at the top is the cover of the book that I was telling you about, In the Image of His God, which has this photograph on the cover. But Father Victor is still there to this day, and if you have the opportunity or the pleasure of visiting St. Agatha's, please call in and give him my regards and say hi. I know he would be more than delighted to assist you and guide you on a tour. He and I are 2 days apart in age. Unfortunately, the toll of working underground has played heavily on the health of Father Victor. He is virtually blind, so he rarely ever goes down into the catacombs now. He confines most of his time to the museum itself, which he has been responsible for building. And by the way, that museum not only contains artifacts from the catacombs of St. Agatha's, it contains artifacts from the whole Mediterranean basin, and is one of the most unique collections in the world. You can stroll unobserved through unattended fields and discover archaeological remains that lie unattended and ignored. It's very soul-destroying to anyone with a love of this heritage. This particular site is a site that I stumbled across quite by chance. I had failed to remember we did the archaeological excavation there back in the early 50s, but since that date, since probably around 1958, there has been no attempt to maintain it, no attempt to keep it. If you go through this little entranceway that you see, let me see here. I don't want to block the vision of anybody on this side, but anyone if you go in through that entrance, you enter this cave area, this catacomb area here, with this beautiful canopy grave. All over the floor are unsavory remains that I won't spoil your day by describing to you, but of course animals use it as a public toilet. It really is depressing and so soul-destroying when you see beautifully hewn archaeological sites like this. In fact, I and my company offered to take it over on a private basis and restore it. I wanted to set up a school of digital photography for archaeologists and use this as our base, which would give them a first-hand opportunity to experience actual archaeological conditions firsthand. But again, I sat in Malta for 2.5 years waiting for approval from the Maltese government, which was never forthcoming. And in the end, I got discouraged and gave up on the project. But it is such a great shame. More recently, the knights, of course, who played such a significant part in Malta's history, were there during the time of the Inquisition. This location you see here at Victoriosa is the Inquisitor's Palace. It is quite a remarkable building. You can see the original, am I blocking anybody's view? Oh, you're all right. You can see the actual torture equipment still in situ there in the Inquisitor's Palace, dating back to 1574. This is the actual area in which the Inquisition took place. The Inquisitor would sit here on this central stool, accompanied by his consorts here, and the clerk of the court would sit here, and the accused, of course, on the little stool in front. But you can see from the fortifications around the island are just absolutely immense, and what an incredibly picturesque location for such a morbid building. But you can enter the prisons, enter the cells, and read the whole history. Time, unfortunately, doesn't allow me to get too deeply into that. Gigantia I wanted to show you because it is without question my favorite site on the island. 5,500 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. 3,600 to 3,200 BC. These are photographs I took a couple of years ago. This one has been highly retouched because I've taken out all the railings and the fencing that the government has put in to preserve the site. But this is one of the more aggressively serviced and looked after locations for tourists. You enter through this walkway here, but these monstrous megalith stones, to this very day, we have no idea how they were put in place or in situ. I think it's probably going to be the third lecture that I'm going to be privileged to give you. We're going to talk about aliens. We're going to talk about the possibility of alien invention, or intervention, I should say. Invention is probably the correct term, but intervention in the construction of such things as the pyramids, the incredible figures on Easter Island, the Aku Aku figures that many of you, I'm sure, have read about. Did they become erected purely by the force of individuals? Could man have, without any outside assistance, have put up these monstrous great facades and these incredible buildings? We're going to explore that, and I think you're going to find some very exciting and interesting information. But Gigantia is a must, and it's on the little island of Gozo, neighboring island of Malta. Musta Dome is a most important site that you must visit in the little town of Musta. My home used to be right next door to it, just here. The fascinating story about the Musta Dome, the third largest unsuspended dome, by the way, in the world, is that during World War II, an Italian bomber let loose one of its load, and it penetrated the roof of the dome just here. But it only just penetrated, and it stuck in the ceiling. And mass was going on in the dome at the time, and there were thousands of Maltese in prayer beneath the dome when the bomb fell. And of course, to this day, they look on it as a miracle that the bomb didn't penetrate and annihilate them all. That bomb is still on display here in the dome at Musta. And it is a place that you must visit, the little town of Musta. I'm running rapidly out of time. Couple of quick pictures here. I don't know whether any of my senior colleagues visited Malta in their military days, but this area here, which is now in total disrepair and disuse, was known as Straight Street. It was the red light district of Malta for servicemen visiting at the end of World War II. I have fond memories of there in the 50s, which we won't go into, of course. This is a replica of the Shroud of Turin. It forms a very significant part of the story in my book, In the Image of His God. Over 37 of those replica shrouds exist around the world, and they were made by placing the shroud on top of the original. For many, that's the explanation as to why, when the investigative study was carried out in the 80s, paint pigment was actually found on the shroud. And it would have been brought about by that placement. But there is a complete documented history of that particular shroud or that replica, and it was my privilege to discover it tucked away in an unknown location on the island. These are the cart tracks which still to this very day amaze archaeologists from around the world. There's a massive, great EU, European Union funded survey going on to try to ascertain the possible cause for these incredible cart tracks into the stone, which traverse the whole of the island, no matter where you go. This is our little lady, the sleeping goddess, and of course my fossilized friend. Let me see, we're just about at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, in the year AD 60, Paul, as some of you may know, was shipwrecked just off the island of Malta. Today there's a little island there with a statue of St. Paul on it, appropriately named St. Paul's Island. But the galleon on which he was traveling to Rome got into stormy seas and sank just off the island. Christianity on the island came about as a result of St. Paul's visit, no question about it. He was there for about 3 months, and it was, as far as we can trace, the beginning of Christianity on the island. This is St. Paul's Church, and immediately below it is the Catacombs in which Paul resided. At the time, nothing more than a rock cave, but it is an entranceway to all those catacombs that we were looking at a little bit earlier. At the base of a statue of St. Paul here, and by the way, this was visited by the last Pope on his visit to Malta, there is a silver chest here. The contents of that chest, you're going to have to read my book to find out about. But it is rather fascinating. It is next to a place called the Wigner Court Museum, which for a long time was unused and in disrepair, and it was there that I discovered that lost Shroud of Turin. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the book that I've been referring to. I've run out of time. The book looks like this, and as I say, hopefully it will be in our gift shop by tomorrow. I'm hoping to arrange to have them here for my lectures so that I can have the privilege of signing them for you. They come, if you choose, with an additional disc, and this disc are the original recordings made with the STURP, the scientific group that were responsible for the investigative study into the shroud in the late 70s. That disc is available online from shroud.com at a price of $44. It's a twin disc set. We will have them available here on the cruise for $10 for anybody who would like one, but they'll be available hopefully within our gift shop within the next day or so. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention today. It's been marvelous. I thank you so much.